All right, everybody, welcome back. This is Hermit Radio. I'm your host, Cameron, and today I'm joined by another form of guru, the microdose guru, Andrew Gagnon. Andrew, how are you today?
Doing great, Cameron. Thanks for having me on. Super excited to get into it and talk about all sorts of fun things today.
Yeah, absolutely. I was going back through my TikTok, which is where I found you, and I recognized that you were one of the first people that I started following. You were one of the first people that showed up on my timeline. And I've noticed, and probably my audience has noticed, I've been interviewing a lot of people on TikTok lately because I just think it's such an easy way to connect with people, especially when they're in your niche or in your kind of same thought process.
Yeah, totally. Like the algorithm on TikTok and like the way that the For You page works for me has been the easiest way to, like you said, engage with like the largest amount of people as quickly as possible. Like just compared to even posting like reels on Instagram, like the most views I've probably gotten on an Instagram reel is like 3 to 4 thousand views, whereas TikTok, I think my most viewed video is like over 400,000 views. So just like the amount of views you're able to get, I think is exponentially higher. And it's kind of weird because you're not able to really DM people on TikTok unless you're like following
Right.
each other. So, I've had to use a few other creative like ways to actually, have conversations with people. So I have like a link to my schedule where people can book a call with me, or I also have my Instagram link there so people can shoot me a message there as well.
Right on. So, okay, so this is typical what I do. Usually the people I talk to are people who have similar experiences like mine, um, some kind of awakening, whether it's through a traumatic experience or some kind of a lot of times I talk to people who used to be abusive of like drugs, and so that was their catalyst for awakening. For me, it was war experiences. What have you always been this way? Have you always been this person, or did
Um,
something happen?
so I mean, for me, it was like I grew up Catholic, like, and I'm the oldest of five kids, so it was a big Catholic family. Always went to like Catholic school and stuff like that. But I always read a ton, and like my mom was an English teacher, so she had like all the classics, and like thankfully my parents weren't the type of crazy Christian Catholic people who like wouldn't let you read stuff. Like I know a lot of people who like their parents wouldn't let them read like Harry Potter and shit because it has magic, but like my mom had all the books and it was like free free for all. I could read whatever I wanted. It was funny. Like I think when I was like 7 years old, I was reading Lord of the Rings, and I would bring in like the massive book to school, and everyone else is reading like these little like picture books and shit, and I'm like sitting there with Lord of the Rings on my desk. So I think just getting into reading early on played a huge role in like just exposing me to different ways of thought and like um, just different like ways of perspectives of looking at reality. And then probably when I was like 15 or 16, I got into smoking weed when I was like 14 or so. Started kind of questioning, my reality, questioning things about religion, and just realizing that like all religions are really trying to get at the same thing, like having that kind of aha moment where it's like, just because someone is Muslim or Jewish or Buddhist or whatever doesn't mean they're wrong. Like they're all just like trying to reach the same like end goal, which whatever you want to call it, like enlightenment or that higher state. So that just kind of pushed me to really like reject Catholicism. I really didn't like it at all. Didn't like what they were about, and kind of started just going my own way, like adopting more Eastern philosophy type stuff, Buddhist thinking, started reading a lot more of that stuff. I got really into like transcendentalists, like Ralph Waldo Emerson, Thoreau, Whitman. I majored in poetry and creative writing in college, so just got into a lot of that type of stuff, and then that led me into like the beat generation, Kerouac, Ginsberg, all those guys, and just kind of spurred me into exploring with psychedelics. So that's kind of like this, I guess, the step-by-step process to how I like got to the psychedelic world, and how that like influenced my spirituality, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. It's again, this is, time after time, every person I talk to, it's a very similar experience. But I will say that yours is different, is yours is more of a creative experience. Yours is more poetic. I can
Yeah.
see and I can feel that through you, which is beautiful. It's unique. I have not met somebody in that same thing. It honestly reminds me a lot of Ram Dass. I'm sure you're familiar with.
Yeah, he's one of my
Um,
favorites.
because Ram Dass, same thing, right? Like he wasn't a religious person, he wasn't a spiritual person, right? He was a psychology professor, and as soon as he started experimenting with psychedelics, that's what it changed for him. He just was like, oh wow, like I was doing this one thing this way and thought that it was only this way, and now I realize that any way is actually the way. Whatever way you want is the way.
Mm, totally. Yeah, I think a lot of people, especially when we're growing up in this like really structured type of society, we're made to think that like there is only like one right way to do things, right? Like, and that's how they want people to think, because they don't want you to think outside the box, because then you're not a good employee. You're not just going to follow instructions. So once you kind of realize that everything is kind of set up for you to be like obedient and to like listen to what you're being told and not question it, then you're like, whoa, like what the fuck is going on? It's like that the Matrix moment where you like kind of come to in the dream, and you're like, everyone else like doesn't notice this, like, and it's like that kind of weird almost, and it can be really scary, I think, and overwhelming for people, which is why like it will lead to psychosis or mental illness or other types of things for some people, especially if you don't have people to talk about it with, like you're gonna feel like you're going crazy. So I think that Ram Dass is a great example of someone who had that experience and like took it and made like a positive out of it, and was able to start developing an understanding of it that he was able to then start teaching others about it in a way that made sense.
Yeah, yeah, it's like, shamans, right? Like that's what shamans are for. That's why they have them. Um, I like this theory and this thought about the matrix. I talk about this often, because it is what everybody understands this, right? Everybody knows, has probably even heard of it, but how many people understand it? Because what is it exactly that we're talking about? We're talking about having self-realization, right? That's what enlightenment is. It's just becoming self-aware. Jesus, Buddha, Moses, all of them, any of the prophets, any of the saints, the difference between you and me and them, or well, really not so much you and me, but really everyone else and them, is that everyone else is not self-aware and these people are. And they say things and they do things that seem mystical only because you haven't realized that you can do that too, right? Like it seems crazy when somebody is like, I was learning about this from like a Freemason thing. It was like a 33-degree Freemason, and a lot of what they know comes from like mystery schools, like all the way back from Egypt.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the thought processes that they do to train people is to have them imagine driving a car and stopping at a green light and then driving through a red light, right? And what's the point of that? The point is to break your training, your mental,
Yeah.
toughness, to break that up, because that's what restricts you from doing a lot of the things that you want to do or don't know how to do. Same concept applies to like these monks who can punch through bricks, right? Why can they do that? Because they don't think that it's impossible, like like everyone else in the world who thinks that they can't. They just learned how to break through that piece, to stop identifying with pain, stop identifying with the fact that this is a solid object. It's all mental training. That's what it
Yeah,
comes down
it all
to.
comes back to belief. I don't know. You're probably familiar with the book, The Four Agreements,
Mm-hmm.
the Toltec wisdom. And it's really, that's what it's all about. We make these agreements growing up. Where someone tells us this is the way it is, and we go, okay. I trust this person. Like, it's usually a family member or a teacher or someone that we look up to, and you trust them, and you agree to whatever it is that they tell you, and then that becomes like a locked in, solidified part of your reality. And until you change that agreement and that belief, then that's going to continue to be true, and your brain's going to continue to prove that to you. So I think like once you learn that you can change your beliefs at will, really, then the possibilities become endless, and you can really do whatever, like that saying, like anything you put your mind to, you can do. Like that you really can. Like if you want to blow shit up with your mind, like that dude in that one movie, Accepted or whatever it is, you can. You can learn how to blow shit up with your mind if you believe it fully enough and practice it. You can do it. And I like that's kind of the way I like to look at it, is like anything that you can imagine or that anyone else can or has ever imagined is possible.
Yeah, and I like to use this train of thought too, because for people who don't recognize that might be a very hard concept to grasp, right? Because of their agreements, right? Their agreements are that those things that you just talked about are not possible.
Yeah.
And I want to circle back to a movie called The Stargate, right? I don't know if you've seen that one. You've seen that one.
I don't think I've seen it, but I'm familiar with it.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, there's a part in the movie where they talk about, this Lord, right? This alien that is pretending to be a god, that claims to be a god, has all these people in this village that worship him. But one of the things they talk about is that a long time ago, these people forgot how to read and write because they were not allowed to learn how to read and write. So basically, they're, very unintelligent, right? They can't think for themselves. They can't do it. They don't even know how to speak really, because all they know how to do is just their everyday life, their functions, their purposes that the gods give them. But that's part of it, right? Like they forgot their history. They forgot who they were because they weren't allowed to read or write. And I think that same concept applies to us. A lot of people talk about the elite and, these secret societies and stuff. I think it's less nefarious than people realize. And I think it's more about just they understand this concept that we're talking about, and they don't want you to understand, right? Because the minute that you realize you don't have to listen to other people, that by itself, like, let alone all the other stuff, all the other things like you mentioned, the minute you realize you don't have to do what other people tell you to do, that's big.
Yeah, true liberation for real. And I think that like you said, they don't want people to know that because it would change the entire structure of how everything functions. Like there wouldn't be billionaires. Like billionaires wouldn't be possible if there wasn't massive amounts of people for them to use to work. If they weren't able to exploit labor, they wouldn't be able to make that much money, because there's no way to like actually do that on your own unless you have a massive workforce, right? So I think I like made a video about this one time about how like cities are like are the cause of billionaires, basically. Like the fact that they have tons of people in one small location where they don't produce any food there. They're dependent on like food being brought into them. They're dependent on, like the internet and the electricity and all of the things that are being regulated by these people who have all the money, because they own all of those services, right? So they can manipulate these people easily by restricting resources and just, making them feel basically afraid, and it puts them in that fight or flight, like survival mode. And when you're in that mode, you're not able to like think outside the box and question what's going on at all. So you're never going to have those realizations, right? Because when you're constantly stuck in that way of thinking, you don't have time to like question it and be like, like I wonder if we did it differently. You don't have time to do that.
Right. Yeah. And this is the problem I run into when I talk to people about this kind of thing. When I try to ask them these kind of questions and have these kind of conversations, the usual response is like, I don't have time to think about that. Right. Like I don't even have the brain space to think about that. Which, if you take that in modern day thinking, now go back 2,000 years ago when Jesus was doing his thing, instead of I don't have time to think about that, they didn't even understand how to think the way that he was thinking, right? Because, and this is a revelation I had the other night. As I mentioned at the beginning of this, it's always been about self-realization, right? That's Jesus and Buddha. That's what their thing was, self-realization. That is enlightenment. So now imagine being like you and me and Jesus, right? Back 2,000 years ago, and zero people around you have self-awareness. Zero. It's all ego. It's all fake identity. And all those people have zero clue how to do the things that we're talking about, how to think for yourself and to tell people no, right? Because what are they doing? They are abiding by religious law, like not even just laws like don't go over the speed limit, religious laws that say you're going to burn in hell for eternity if you don't do blase blase.
Yeah, totally. And like the way I like to think about it back then is that there probably was more than just one person. Like there probably was more than one Jesus, but like they didn't have the internet or phones or ways of communicating over long distances. So it was like very probably like isolated, groups of people who were following someone like that, in different areas. And then Jesus just happened to be like the one that gets kind of remembered and gets used then to have a religion created around him. But what his teachings were not about religion. It was about getting in touch with yourself, like God is in all of you. And I think that this is like a big distinction I like to make is between consciousness and awareness. Like everyone is conscious, everyone has consciousness, but we're not born with awareness or self-awareness. So that's like a skill we have to develop. And how ego tricks you is it tells you that you have self-awareness, like that consciousness is self-awareness. So you don't have to do any more work. Like you already have it. And you shouldn't feel like you have to learn anything else, which keeps you stuck in that one same place. So once you have that moment of self-realization and awareness, that's understanding that you never are finished, that you never get to a place where you're done learning or you're done developing spiritually, emotionally and all that. It's a continual process.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's something I struggle with, right? Like I have times where I like hit like a standstill where I'm like, all right, well, I mean, I get it, like what else is there to get? And except for it's like what you just said, you know what I mean? Like there's always a way to be more compassionate. There's always a way to be more kind. And there's certainly always a way to appreciate this life that we have more. Even as advanced as I think I am or tend to try to be, I still get frustrated, right? I mean, like when I look at the world right now, it frustrates me. When I
Yeah.
look at the confusion and I see people just being so ugly to each other, it frustrates me. And that's the opposite of what I want to be. And it's ironic for me because like my awakening experience happened like 2 to 3 years ago. And it didn't really reach its peak until right when COVID happened. That's when I was going through the peak of it. And so that was like the scariest time. You want to talk about psychosis. Like, I mean, every day I thought I was losing my mind. Like I'm trapped in my house and like, I can't really talk about it with other people. I don't really understand fully what's going on with myself. And now that we're out of that, we're still in the stages of the world kind of being upside down. And it's not like it used to be. I often like think like, why couldn't this happen to me in the 90s? Like this would have been a way more badass experience in the 90s when I was actually happy and like, doing fun things all the time. But I don't think that it has the same meaning if it were to happen like that, right? Like these things happen during a catalyst. They happen when shit is rough and not fun. Like that's the point. It's not meant to be fun. It's meant to be an evolution. And evolution isn't always fun.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that like I forget who I heard say this, but like when you kind of adopt a new belief, the universe will then like test that belief. So like if you say like, oh, I believe that I can, just quit my job and manifest like whatever I need on a day-to-day basis. Well, then like the universe is going to throw some trials in your way. It's going to like present you with an opportunity to do what you said. It's going to present you with challenges to reinforce that belief that you declared, and you have the opportunity when that when those things come up to either reinforce it and commit to what you said, or to still remain in your comfort zone. So everyone always says real growth happens outside the comfort zone. So like one way that I like to take control of that process is by like intentionally forcing myself to do things that are uncomfortable. Like I'm doing it on purpose, like not waiting for the universe to put me in a situation where I'm uncomfortable, like taking the steps to do that myself. And like one example is when I Graduated college literally the day I took my last exam. I got on a plane to move out here to Lake Tahoe, California, because I just knew that was where I needed to be. I like felt, that was just felt a call to go there. And I had like $400 and like not much of a plan. I think I had an apartment booked for like a month, so I had somewhere to go, but I just went there, and did it without having a safety net and without having like a backup plan really. And being in a situation like that where you're forced to figure things out, I think is like the moments where we really learn these new skills and are able to change our agreements at a more rapid pace.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I appreciate that. And that's the same concept of like, on a smaller scale, like taking an ice bath
Right. Yeah.
or
Those are like the day-to-day things you can do, like
yeah.
take that ice cold shower, like make that vulnerable video, like doing something that just makes you uncomfortable on a small scale will then help you when those larger scale events come up as well.
All right. So, you call yourself the microdose guru. So let's talk about that.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about, I'm assuming you're referring to psychedelics.
Yeah. So that's really, I've been working with psychedelics. That's my first experience when I was 17. I'm 27 now. So I would say like probably since the time I've been like 21, I've been working with psychedelics in more of like a leadership role, like being the one who is kind of the leader through trips when I'm doing them with like groups
Like a
of friends.
shaman.
Like definitely like a modern medicine man type
Yeah.
of thing, and like for a while I always kind of felt that like imposter syndrome, like, didn't feel like I was worthy of like calling myself a medicine man or like whatever, but I've always felt that like call, like that's always just felt like natural to me. And I haven't done any type of like past life regression type stuff, but like I wouldn't be surprised if that's something that I've like done throughout my journey as a being, a eternal being, like if that's something I've been doing. But either way, like that's something I've always just felt comfortable doing and enjoy doing, bringing those experiences to people, like watching the change that occurs over such a short amount of time, is just amazing. Like I've just witnessed so many really awesome things where it's like 10 years of therapy happening in like a couple hours of time, where people like are able to process through like traumas, insecurities, whether it be like, an issue with like sexuality or identity or something like that, but like being able to like come to like a better realization of who they are as a person and being able to love themselves like more fully in just such a short amount of time is like such an incredible thing to watch. And I'm not saying that like psychedelics are this magic like cure all, but they are an amazing tool. They are so much more effective than the pharmaceutical drugs available to us right now in terms of like mental health treatment. And using psychedelics with other mindfulness, practices as well is like just the best recipe for being able to treat yourself and your mental health, and being able to bring that healing that you need to yourself without having to go to like a doctor or, like an expert. And that's not what, I want to present myself as. Like I'm someone who's going to work with you through the experience. I can hold the space for you. I know the right things to say, and I can ensure that you're going to be safe and, have a positive experience. But the real work is done by the individual, and everyone has to commit to the healing journey. If you're not committed to doing it, nobody can force you, to have that experience. You have to want it.
Yeah. Yeah. I have a very limited experience. I've microdosed psilocybin on a handful of times, but each time was a very, very beautiful and pleasant experience. And I really resonated with what you said about like 10 years of therapy in just a couple hours. I agree with that. That is something that I felt for myself. And I think it's the future. I really do. I mean, we're already seeing things like MDMA being used to treat PTSD. We know that a lot of people are experimenting with DMT and ayahuasca. I think it's the future. I mean, they clearly were using it in the past, right? The ancients. That's
Yeah.
why that we had shamans and medicine men, right? But I'd like to point out, I'm in school right now myself. My major is history and minor is religious studies. But there's a direct correlation, something that I've noticed. When you go back, right, like our ancient ancestors, that's how they did things, right? Like plant medicine, shamans, medicine men, things like that. Those people were pretty much all murdered off for the most part, right? When you look at the Native Americans, you look at people in Central and South America, the vast majority of them were wiped out, right? Like people who thought that way, lived that way. And then if you look at the Eastern philosophies, in India and China and on, there are remnants, but it's not like it used to be. It doesn't flourish like it used to be. And I think it's ironic when we look at the past that was the normal way. The spiritual way was the normal way. But somewhere in that timeline, all of that was washed away by violence. And now we're just starting to come back to it.
Well, I mean, it's funny because like modern medicine, as we look at it, is very young, like it's only been around for like 100 years or so. And that's also funny because seems like there's so many like new diseases that come about as like a part of this new modern medicine, this modern system. And it's because, like you said, every illness back then was looked at as like something that had a basis in spirituality, because like everything's mind, body, and spirit are all intertwined. And that's what they understood back then. And what people still understand now, who are in the alternative holistic healing space, because that is how you achieve real healing. Like your body has the power to heal itself, with pretty much anything, like cancer, like serious, immune diseases, like all these things that modern medicine can't seem to defeat. Your body can heal them with the right approach, So I think that people are starting to finally wake up to the fact that like modern medicine doesn't have it all figured out. Like it's a great emergency medical system. Like if you break your arm or like have some kind of accident or something, like, yeah, they can sew you back up really well and they can perform, surgeries really well. But in terms of like being able to use the body's natural systems to heal, it's not very good at doing that. So I think that that's where returning back to like that more spiritual approach is going to help so many people, not only with mental illness but also physical illnesses as well, because when you have that approach, you're actually treating like the source of where those things are coming from, rather than just treating symptoms of whatever the disease is. And that's like what mental health is right now. It's not really narrowing in on what the source is. It's just treating the symptoms. Like you go in and you tell them, oh, I can't sleep, I'm anxious all the time, I'm feeling like crap. They're gonna prescribe you all these medications that'll kind of get rid of those bad feelings, but it's not actually solving what the source of the issue is. So I think with psychedelics, they offer a way for people to get back in touch with their own intuition, really, I think is what it is. And once you can get in touch with your intuition, then you know what's best for you. You don't have to go to a doctor and ask them, what should I do to feel better? You're going to know like, oh, I'm feeling crappy because I haven't been eating right. I haven't been exercising. I've been, laying around and being lazy. So I need to switch that up. And if I don't feel better, then there's another question to be asked. But your intuition and your inner voice knows what's best for you, and a lot of people can't aren't able to listen to that anymore.
For sure. So switching from that gear, what do you think about what's going on in the world right now?
I mean, it's just so much. It's hard to kind of make heads or tails of it, and like I think that what it really is they're just trying to constantly keep people distracted and divided, because the media is just always switching it up, changing the story. Like one week it's going one way and another week it's going the other way, and like to me, it's because the people, like you said, who understand how to, use energy and things like that to, control and have power. They don't want people to wake up to the fact that they can also do that, right? So the best way for them to do that is to keep people distracted and divided and afraid. And they've always been doing that to some extent, but I think right now it's like they're really kind of scrambling because with with the tools that we have with social media, the internet, and all that type of stuff, people are able to communicate a lot more quickly and share these ideas a lot more quickly, and debunk a lot of things that in the past would have been accepted, really just without question. So they're kind of scrambling to keep people distracted and divided and not, having these realizations, which I think is, not really working as well as they want it to, because no matter what they're doing, it's people are still waking up to it. So it's just kind of a weird, kind of scary time, and I'm kind of interested to see like what is going to actually happen, because nothing like momentous has really happened yet. It's just been kind of like little steps in towards that direction. So we'll kind of see here the next 6 months, I think, what they're going to really do.
Yeah. Have you done much looking into what's going on in Australia?
Yeah, I watched a lot of the videos about it, and I have a friend that lives there, and it just seems like they are kind of testing out what they're capable of doing, like how far they're able to push people, because um, they're not doing it everywhere yet. So I think they're kind of doing it like there first to see how far they're able to push people before they crack, before they start fighting back. And it seems like they're kind of hitting that limit because people are starting to push back. But I mean, I talked to a guy who was in Melbourne last week, and he said, like, as long as you're kind of minding your own business, like no one really bothers you. It's only like if you're trying to protest anything related to COVID, that's when they're like really, the police are coming in
Yeah.
force. So I don't know. It could be also being distorted by the media as well. So you never really know how like real a lot of the stuff you see in videos is. Like, that's what I always try to remind myself is like, even though it's a video that looks real, you never really know like what the situation or context of that like video is. So it's hard to really like to know. What I try to do is just focus on the things that I can control, that are within my scope of like things that I can actually make an impact on in my life, and try to like ignore the rest of it, because the more you like look into it and the deeper you get into it, it's just, pulling you in different directions, and it's draining your energy. So like the best practice, I think, is just focusing on the things that are within your control and not trying to worry about anything else.
Yeah. And I think that's the hardest thing, right? I mean, like, I think that's also why we're experiencing that right now, right? Like, why else would so many people be waking up for such an important time? You know what I mean? Like, it wouldn't make sense if this was happening, like if people were just all of a sudden waking up during the 90s, right? Like, it wouldn't make sense then, but it makes sense now. And it is kind of like a tribulation, everybody just kind of has to deal with, like, witness it, deal with it in their own way. But that's the catalyst, you know what I mean? Like, this is collective trauma for people, is figuring this out for themselves and going through this hard time. And it's funny because, like, I talk to people all the time about government stuff, and like, I was in the military, so I was witness to all kinds of crazy shit. But I really find it interesting how many people just don't have the full scope, right? Like, I talk to people and they have no idea some things that are done behind closed doors, right? Like, for instance, I was just talking to somebody the other day about this guy named Dr. Ewan Cameron. Have you ever heard of that guy?
I don't think so.
Yeah, so the dude was a OSS agent back, during World War II. He was a psychiatrist, basically. Before like real psychology got popular, he was like one of the original psychologists. But this dude, his specialty while he was in the OSS was torture, like learning how to brainwash people and get the truth out of them. But
Mhm.
after the war was over, he basically went and started working for mental asylums and was doing projects like experiments on unwilling participants in mental asylums, doing shit like microwaving parts of their brains, electroshock therapy against their will, like not asking anybody if they wanted this, doing it behind closed doors. And a lot of people didn't even know he was doing it, while simultaneously doing other projects that were getting him awards. But he was doing all this stuff. And then he would be one of the precursors to the MK Ultra program. So the CIA funded him to do those kinds of things. And so one thing that like I try, like I'm with you, I like to, center myself. I try to not worry because there's no point in worrying about anything. But I do think awareness is good. Like people need to know that, like, and I had another conversation with somebody really important that we talked about, like, it's not about being evil, it's about being unconscious, right? Like that dude probably was doing that stuff because he thought that that really was going to help somebody, right? Like he really thought he was going to help somebody somehow by doing these things. Like it's going to be helpful someday, but this is the
That's a
problem
question
with
I ask. Like,
unconsciousness.
do these people are their intentions really good, or like how far can you go doing stuff like that without having some type of inkling that you're harming people or that what you're doing is wrong? Like I forget the name of the guy, but the guy who did lobotomies for like 30 years, he would freaking pound things into people's like eye sockets here and like fucking scrape out part of their brain. And he did it to like children, like women, like people. I think he did it up until like the 70s when they finally made it illegal. But like I feel like at some point you have to know like
Yeah.
what
Yeah.
you're
And
doing.
there probably
Like,
is. Yeah. Like
you
there
have to
probably
know.
is a level of like, and this is where it gets confusing, right? Like because like then because you have people like a psychopath, right? But really, what are we talking about when we're talking about psychopath? It's somebody void of emotion. And we could talk about whether or not that's like a neurological problem in the brain, but that when we say that, that's because we're not talking about self-consciousness. We're not talking about spirit. We're just purely talking bodily function, which is that is a something that we have created to because we don't know. Here's the thing, like there's no blood test, there's no test to say you're schizophrenic, you're psychopath, you're that. It's all based on emotion, right? Like when you go to a psychologist, they're basing all of that off your emotions. They're not basing it on any actual blood work, right? Like if you have cancer, we can do blood work to show that you have cancer. But if you're schizophrenic or a psychopath, there's no blood work for that, right? Like maybe some kind of imbalance, maybe, but I don't think so. That's the only thing that I would say, like you could probably test to see if somebody has that kind of thing. So what we're talking about is void of awareness and void of emotion. And so then is it really like choice? Are they really actually making choices to hurt people, or are they just doing like flight or fight, basic survival instincts? And then there is a degree, that there are people who are choosing to hurt people, right? Again, it's unconscious, right? They probably have some kind of trauma that's screwing them up in the head or whatever. But yeah, I mean, doing things like that, you have to know, right? Like you have to know that you're hurting people, that what you're doing is kind of fucked up, right? Like, especially if you're having to hide it.
Yeah, I mean that's from my perspective. Like I feel like you'd have to have some kind of idea. At least if you don't feel bad, like you would have to know that like other people, would think that it's bad, which would then lead you to understand that like it's not something that is like good or acceptable to do. Like the the guy that you first brought up, like why was he doing it behind closed doors? Because he knew at some level that he couldn't tell people like openly that that's what he was doing. So, whether they're psychopathic and they don't feel bad about it or not, they still have like a intellectual understanding of like that it's wrong.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's like that. It's like that experiment. I'm sure you've heard of that experiment, that college experiment where they had like all these students, like half of them were prisoners and then the
Yeah.
other half were guards, or right. Like
Yeah.
I have a serious problem with stuff like that. I just wrote a paper about it for school, We read a chapter of a book, and this guy was using some, trying to make a point using an experiment of a similar experiment, which was like they had people, but they made them sit in a dark room. And this is when they first started doing like interrogations with lights, where like you can't see anything but this bright light. And he said what they would do is they would have to say something that they believe 100%. And then these people on the other end would scream at them and say, "You're wrong. You don't know what you're talking about." Basically to confuse these people and to get them to break the mold of believing that they're correct, right? So in their view, they were trying to do a good thing, which is to get people to stop being so stuck in like, I'm right, right? Like to accept that maybe they're wrong. But I am fundamentally against these kind of experiments. They're cruel, they're inhumane. There's so many other ways that we can go about this kind of thing, right? Like that's a lack of understanding and a lack of understanding of what self-awareness is. If you knew what it was, you know that people have to figure that out on their own. You can't force anyone to be self-aware. They have to figure it out on their own. But there are ways of helping it, right? I mean,
Yeah.
psychedelics, obviously.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think that when it's kind of like the blind leading the blind type of thing, like when someone doesn't have like the basic understanding of what awareness is and they're trying to do experiments like based on, figuring that out, or like, changing people's, perspectives basically, like they're doing it from a place of having no understanding of, like, of what it actually is. So it's just like not going to be effective. And also, if things like psychedelics are illegal and limited, then they're going to be trying to find an alternative, to produce those results and to like, make people have that awakening moment, or to experience, what they would using something like psychedelics. So I think like policies like that, making psychedelics illegal, lead to all sorts of, things that just wouldn't have happened otherwise, and it's kind of like a dark period of, consciousness, where like consciousness kind of dipped, like went from a point of being elevated and having a higher understanding of it to, having less understanding.
Yeah, exactly. And this is why I'm a big fan of anthropology, because I mean, me personally, I don't think the way that we understand history and anthropology, I think it's wrong. I don't think we have the full scope of it. I just don't understand, you know what I mean? Like there has not been a single person who can actually explain to me how you take a chimpanzee monkey and it's somehow turned into us, right? Like it takes conscious
There's
thought, conscious form.
a missing link
Yeah,
somewhere.
right. I mean, and here's the thing, like in my anthropology class, they show us that chart where it shows the chimpanzee and the 5 stages of where it becomes man. But we know that that middle piece, it doesn't exist. We don't have that yet.
Yeah.
We don't have that. So like even the charts that they show you are not correct. They want you to think it is that way. They want you to believe that that is exactly how it happened, but there's no proof. We have fossils of monkeys from a long time ago, and we have fossils of, Neanderthal, caveman, whatever, but we don't have anything in between. And if there was, don't you think we would have found it already?
Yeah, I mean, you could say yes, but it's like also if they're like if that missing link is someone that was, intelligent or conscious, was like the first conscious, being, maybe they had a different practice of like burial or whatever, there's all these like conjectures you can make. But I think, bottom line is that consciousness, we aren't 100% sure that consciousness just evolved naturally through the process of evolution as we've, like laid it out to be. Like we can't be sure that that's how consciousness developed, and I think like this is where a lot of problems of like ego come in too, where like all these billionaires now want to go to Mars and whatnot to preserve consciousness and like the human species and whatnot. But it's like, I think that's just like a big ego thing, like if you think that the universe, hasn't been, doesn't have other ways of being conscious and observing itself, then that's like a big ego thing. And, I think just looking at consciousness as something that evolved naturally through the process of evolution is doesn't really make sense. It's something that defies logical explanation, and we really have no idea how it happened. And I don't think that anyone can say that they have, can be certain about that.
Yeah, I mean, to be completely honest, I would be more inclined to believe the stoned ape theory
Yeah,
over the way that we personally like believe it right now, the way that history has it.
yeah,
But I think it's, I mean, like I think that there's some credibility into the stories of Atlantis and Lemuria, right? Like it doesn't mean that like it's as dramatic as people trying to make it out, but like, is it really that hard to believe that maybe we've done this already? That we've already
yeah. I,
been
I
like
think it's
advanced,
I think it's harder to believe that this is the first time, in
right?
my opinion. You
And
know, it
my argument is like, think about this, right? The Titanic has been underwater for I think close to 200 years, if not that already,
mhm,
and it's 70% eroded. It's 70% gone.
almost gone.
So another 200 years, it will be gone. So now think about that over the course of hundreds of thousands, if not millions of years. If there was anything, it's gone. We wouldn't
Especially if
know.
there's civilization that was living in complete harmony with nature, like there'd be no evidence. And
That's right.
that's the way that like we should be living. That's why we have so many problems, is because we're not living like that. We're living an unnatural lifestyle. Um, but any civilization that came before us, if they were of equal or higher intelligence, they'd be living totally natural, lifestyles, and there'd be little to no evidence besides, like some cave paintings and stuff, which we have found, like really old cave paintings and whatnot. But
Exactly. And if you think about it today, right? Imagine an asteroid hits the Earth today and wipes out 70% of our population, wipes, you know what I mean? Like everything. In a matter of generations, our infrastructure would, like we wouldn't be thriving anyways, right? Like all the humans that exist, like the technology would be pretty much done after about 10 years, right? That's just obviously I'm not a scientist, so that's a guess. But whatever humans do live after that, it's not going to be the same. And so now think about that in the course of like humans having to restart, right? Like there's not going to be technological innovation. Any technology that we did have, they're going to be doing their best just to maintain it. But after a while, don't you think that it's more likely that like any of the people that did survive, they would have a hard time surviving? They wouldn't be able to keep it together like we used to be able to do. And at some point, maybe they forget everything that they did know. I mean, think about right now, dude. So many people don't even have intelligence the way that we know it normally, right? If
yeah,
you need to know something, you pull up your phone and you pull it up on your phone. You don't know it up here, you know it on here. You don't need to know it up here anymore. So imagine that happens, a catastrophe of epic proportions. Intelligence we know has gone out the window because it can't be maintained the way that we had it before. So people are, dumb. And you know what I mean? Like they have to start all over again. I think that when we're talking about consciousness and like the dips, as you mentioned, I think that that's what we're looking at.
yeah, totally. I mean, I think that that's a much more kind of logical way to look at it than just that we evolved, in the past. I don't even know what they say now, like a couple 100,000 years or something. Like that seems very less plausible to me than that. We either came here from somewhere else and settled here, or that we've been here for millions and millions of years, kind of going through that up and down cycle of like building civilization and then losing everything and having to restart from the bottom, and kind of redoing that over and over again.
Yeah. I think that that's 10 times more plausible than anything else. And this is, part of my problem with academia is that the teachers that are supposed to have the answers, where do they get their answers? They get it from the same book that you're reading that's just been revised 1,000 times, right? And I was asking my anthropology teacher, some basic questions because we're talking about evolution. And he talks about how, like our brains when we were monkeys basically were, the size of one fist. Right now we know that they're like two fists. So he says that over the time that of our evolution, our brains have grown 5 times the size. And so I'm like, okay, well, that's fascinating. I'm like, is there any other known animal on Earth that has had that much brain growth? And he said, no. I said, okay, well, why do humans have that? And he goes, well, we're just uniquely special. And I'm just like, you're a scientist.
Yeah.
Like, where in science does we're special fall into, right? Like, how is that a scientific explanation? But it is. That's literally how they explain it. And they're like, we don't know, we're special. Humans are somehow special. Our brains grew 5 times the size, and no other living animal has had that kind of brain growth. That's incredible to me. Like, that by itself should be an enigma that should have people scratching their heads.
No, definitely. I mean, and I feel like the fact that, you know, there is just one kind of accepted theory kind of leads to people not questioning as much as, you know, they should. And that's a big thing that kind of turned me off of, yeah, academia in general. Is just like, it's so structured and just like boring. Like there's no, you know, there's not a lot of creativity in like the academic world. It's very like cut and dry, and like this is how you have to behave, and like you have to write papers in this way, and like, and when you're doing everything, when everyone's doing everything the same way, how can you expect to have, you know, any type of creative new theories or like solutions to the problems? There's just not. It's not going to produce that. It's not an environment that's, you know, conducive to breeding a creative solution.
Did you see that? Did you watch that Joe Rogan podcast with Graham Hancock and Randall Carlson?
I don't think so.
So Graham Hancock and Randall Carlson come on a show. They've been on multiple times. Graham Hancock is kind of a journalist, but he's written a bunch of books. He does a lot of his own archaeological work. He's been all over the world, to Egypt, Brazil, Göbekli Tepe, all these places. So is Randall Carlson. And they're of the same mind as you and me, which is that our history is an enigma. They don't know. They're trying to understand it better, but they don't believe that the actual way it is portrayed to us is correct. And so they did this show with Joe Rogan, and it got really popular. But then they came back for another one because an academic dude that works for a journal that is specifically for like debunking things like, I'm trying to think, there's a professional word I'm looking for, but basically trying to, like, a skeptic, right? Like, so like his job is to, like, history is set this way, anything that challenges that, his job is to, like, to go research it and find out if it's true or not, right? So they show up for this meeting, right, in this podcast, and they're going and going and going. And this guy shows up with no slides, shows up with no work, no papers, nothing to read, to cite his evidence from. And Graham Hancock and Randall Carlson show with like 200 slides worth of information and documents, stuff that they can fact-based prove what they're saying. And this other guy, this skeptic, he's sitting there and he said, well, I don't have to, because this is history. Like, that's what it is. Like, I don't have to prove anything because that is history. And Joe Rogan literally calls him out. He goes, like, what? You came to this show with nothing? Like, it's almost like you're doing this on purpose. Like, yeah, you don't know what you're talking about. And he got called out, and he was like so caught off guard by being called out that he was like, well, I need to bring in my own scientific evidence. And he brings on some other guy and some other, like, skeptic professor guy. And he, cites basically the same thing, says, well, this is history. Like, this is what we know. But again, not citing any real thing. And Graham Hancock and Randall Carlson are over here, like, back and forth, just over and over again, sticking out real information. And that in and of itself is the problem with academia. You know what I mean? Like, you said something earlier about it, which is these big egos. Because if we change history, it takes away credit from people who, quote unquote, found it.
Right.
Or
yeah,
research.
They were right. They did all this research. They came up with the right way. And like, yeah, it all comes back to ego. And like, when you are coming from that place, you just can't have, your mind can't be open to like a new possibility, right? Because you've already written everything else off as wrong. You've already accepted that there's the only one way. So it's that agreement that you've made with yourself. You've already agreed that you're not going to challenge it. So then how could someone be a researcher if they have that mindset? They're not going to be a very good researcher if they have that mindset. They're only going to be looking for things that reinforce what they already believe in. So I think like the people that get labeled as conspiracy theorists or, like crazy people, they're the best researchers we have because they're willing to go down any rabbit hole. They're willing to like test any theory and, try to find evidence that, negates it or proves it to be wrong, because that's how we like fact check each other. Otherwise it's just like, it's like 1984, like everything just be fabricated, and you can rewrite history every 10 years if you want.
Yeah, exactly. And that's a valid and excellent point. And it's funny because a lot of people would point to like Alex Jones, right?
Yeah.
Like a lot of people give Alex Jones shit, but how much shit has he been right about? Right?
Most.
Like he was talking about Jeffrey Epstein 10 years before he was even in the headlines for what he was doing.
Yeah.
And you know what I mean? And it's just like, it's this hypocrisy to me. People want to call him a conspiracy theorist, but nobody has still never given him credit for talking about Epstein back in the early 2000s.
Or we're
You know what I
talking about
mean?
vaccines and viruses like 10 years ago, you know?
Exactly.
Like he's been right about a lot of stuff, but he comes across as crazy, you know, and because he has that high energy, he gets passionate about what he talks about, so people just write him off as like a nutcase, you know. But in
Yeah.
reality, he's been right about a lot of stuff. So I think that it's important to like give everyone credibility. You know, like we only give people credibility who have like a PhD or whatever. But to me, all that means is that they've had more time to be indoctrinated into thinking only one way. So that's kind of like why I just totally left. Like I tried to even drop out of undergrad, but ended up having to go back and finish because of like legal issues. It's another long story, but yeah, like I was just done with school because I realized it's just there to indoctrinate people into one way of thinking. And like it's the same goes for even like the arts, like poetry and you know, writing and all that type of stuff. The stuff that's looked at as good is the stuff that is academically like agreed upon to be like good poetry. But it's like, what is that? You know, like to me, good poetry is what like connects with people and you know, gives like a valid representation of real life and experience. You know, it's not something that's just like academically accepted as like, you know, hot right now, or like what is popular in academia. Like I don't want to just write to like one audience, you know. I want to write stuff that I care about, really, because it's just for me, but for anyone else who can resonate with that and, you know, sharing that shared experience. That's like what I want to write for, and why I like writing in general.
Definitely. Well, Andrew, this has been awesome. If people want to find you and get some of your information, or even get in touch with you about some of your work, where can they find you?
Totally, yeah. Instagram is the best place to reach out. So at the Microdose Guru. Same thing on TikTok if you want to check out some of my video content. But yeah, feel free to reach out on Instagram or book a call at the link in my bio there on Instagram or TikTok as well.
Excellent. Yeah. This has been great. I love these kind of conversations. I love expanding people's minds just to think a little bit harder than what they normally might do in their day to day. So this has been great. You're an awesome guest. And I'd love to have you on again if you're ever open.
Yeah, totally. Would love to. This has been fun.
Excellent. Okay. For everybody else, we'll catch you next week. This has been Hermit Radio.